Hannah Moore stood barefoot on the cold hospital floor, her swollen belly pressed against the thin cotton gown, her hands shaking as fluorescent lights burned above her. The private surgical center in Midtown Manhattan smelled of disinfectant and expensive perfume, the kind that tried to hide fear with money. Nurses passed quickly, eyes lowered, pretending not to see what was happening in the hallway outside operating room 3. Victor Langford's hand was locked around Hannah's collar. He yanked her closer, his voice low and precise, the same voice he used in boardrooms and investor calls. "Sign it," he said. "This ends tonight." The paper crumpled between them. A kidney donation consent form already clipped to a metal board. Hannah's name was typed neatly at the top. Below it, 2 signatures already sat where her own should have been. They looked like hers, too much like hers. "I'm pregnant," Hannah whispered, one hand instinctively shielding her stomach. "They said I can't." Victor tightened his grip. "You can," he cut in. "You will. Lydia doesn't have time for your emotions." Across the hall, Lydia Cross lay on a gurney, pale makeup carefully applied, IV line taped to her arm. She watched the scene with wet eyes and trembling lips, the perfect picture of a dying woman. When their eyes met, Lydia's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. A nurse cleared her throat. "Mr. Langford, we need the patient calm before anesthesia." Victor didn't turn. "She'll be calm when she signs." Hannah felt the room tilt. Her heart raced, each beat slamming into her ribs, into her baby. She remembered the doctor's warning only 2 days ago. High risk, possible preterm labor, avoid stress, avoid trauma, avoid fear. She almost laughed at how impossible that sounded now. Her phone slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. The screen lit up. A message from Victor, sent minutes earlier, glowed like a threat. "If you refuse, you leave here alone. Without money, without a child." Tears blurred Hannah's vision. She realized, with a hollow clarity, that this was never about saving a life. It was about control. It always had been. Victor leaned closer, his breath cold against her ear. "This is your last chance," he whispered. "Either you give her your kidney, or I take everything else from you." Somewhere beyond the closed doors, machines hummed, monitors beeped, and a surgical team prepared for a procedure built on lies. Contracts had been signed in secret offices, favors traded in quiet elevators, and silence purchased with money. Hannah felt smaller than ever, yet something inside her refused to disappear despite the fear crushing her chest. At the end of the hallway, a small red light blinked on above a security camera, quietly recording every second. Hannah opened her mouth to speak, unaware that this moment would shatter Victor's world forever. 2 weeks earlier, Hannah Moore still believed her marriage could be saved. She woke each morning in the penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline, sunlight spilling across marble floors she never felt were hers. At 26 weeks pregnant, her body felt heavy, but her hope was stubborn. She told herself Victor Langford was only stressed, only busy, only distant because powerful men carried heavy burdens. Victor no longer touched her unless it was necessary. No casual kisses, no hand on her back. When Hannah spoke, he often looked past her, fingers scrolling on his iPhone, nodding without listening. When she asked about the late nights, he smiled calmly and said, "You worry too much. That's the hormones." She believed him, because believing him was easier than admitting she was alone. Hannah had given up her nursing job when the pregnancy became risky. Victor insisted. "Focus on the baby," he said. "I'll take care of everything." At first, it sounded loving. Slowly, it became a cage. Her bank cards stopped working one by one. Her name was removed from shared accounts. Even the apartment concierge was instructed to call Victor before letting her guests upstairs. When Hannah protested, Victor reminded her gently, "You don't need to stress about money. I handle it. Trust me." Trust became silence. Silence became fear. One night, unable to sleep, Hannah wandered into Victor's home office. His MacBook Pro sat open on the desk, a glowing spreadsheet filled with medical investments, clinic acquisitions, and patient volume forecasts. She didn't understand most of it, but one folder caught her eye. It was labeled simply, L.C. Treatment Timeline. Inside were lab results, compatibility charts, and surgical schedules. At the top was Lydia Cross's name. At the bottom was Hannah's blood type. Her hands began to shake. Before she could read more, Victor appeared in the doorway. He didn't yell. He didn't panic, he just closed the laptop and looked at her with quiet disappointment. "You shouldn't touch my work," he said. "I'm your wife," Hannah replied softly. "Why is my blood type in your files?" Victor sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Because families help each other, and Lydia is family." That was the first time Hannah understood she had already been chosen. Days later, Lydia appeared at their penthouse, pale and fragile, leaning on Victor's arm. She thanked Hannah for the tea, for the couch, for being so understanding. When Lydia excused herself to the bathroom, Victor leaned in and whispered, "She's very sick. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Hannah placed a hand on her belly, feeling her baby move, as if sensing danger. She wanted to scream, to run, to call someone, anyone, but she had no money, no access, and no proof. That night, as Victor slept peacefully beside her, Hannah lay awake staring at the ceiling, realizing she was not a wife in this house. She was inventory, and somewhere, plans were already moving forward without her consent. She listened to the city outside, distant sirens and traffic echoing through glass walls, wondering how a woman could vanish inside a marriage without leaving her home. Fear wrapped around her tighter than Victor ever had, but beneath it grew something unfamiliar. Awareness. If this was a plan, then plans could fail. If silence had trapped her, then truth might still set her free. She did not yet know who to trust, only that time was no longer on her side, and fear was becoming a lesson. The next morning, Victor scheduled a medical appointment Hannah never agreed to attend. The appointment was scheduled without Hannah's consent, but Victor framed it as concern. He told her over breakfast, his voice smooth, that the doctor wanted routine tests because of her pregnancy. He said it while sipping coffee, scrolling headlines, acting like nothing in their world was wrong. Hannah nodded, because nodding had become a survival instinct, even when every part of her body warned her something was deeply wrong. The clinic was not a hospital. That was the first red flag. It sat between luxury offices on Park Avenue, glass walls polished, marble floors spotless, but no emergency wing, no neonatal unit, no familiar hospital noise. The receptionist greeted Victor by name. Hannah noticed that no one asked for her insurance card. Inside the examination room, Victor never left her side. He answered questions meant for Hannah. He corrected details she tried to give. When the nurse asked about her stress levels, Victor smiled and said, "She worries too much. Always has." Blood was drawn. Urine samples collected. Forms were handed over, already partially filled out. Hannah saw her full legal name typed neatly across the top of multiple pages. Consent boxes were checked in advance. When she hesitated, Victor's hand rested on her shoulder, fingers pressing just hard enough to remind her who controlled the room. "This is standard," he whispered. "Don't embarrass yourself." A doctor entered briefly, barely meeting Hannah's eyes. He spoke quickly about compatibility testing, about how family donations often saved lives. He never mentioned pregnancy risks. He never asked Hannah if she felt safe. When she tried to speak, Victor interrupted, asking about timelines, recovery speed, and legal clearance. Hannah's heart pounded. She felt her baby kick, sharp and sudden, like a warning. She asked directly, "What kind of compatibility test is this?" The doctor hesitated. Just for a moment. Then he said, "Renal tissue markers." The word renal echoed in Hannah's mind long after they left the room. In the elevator down, Victor's phone rang. He turned away, voice low. Hannah caught fragments. "She's a match." "Yes, even pregnant. We'll proceed." Her stomach dropped. That night, Hannah searched quietly on her phone, reading medical forums and legal articles. Kidney donation, pregnancy risks, consent laws. Her hands trembled as she learned the truth. No ethical hospital would approve a kidney donation from a pregnant woman. Not without independent evaluations. Not without multiple safeguards. Victor was bypassing all of them. The next day, he drove her back to the clinic, this time with more urgency. He told her they were just finishing paperwork. He told her Lydia's condition had worsened. He told her a good woman would help. Hannah realized then that the trap had already closed. This was not a request, it was a process, designed to move forward whether she agreed or not. The tests, the forms, the silence, all pieces of the same machine. As they walked through the hallway, Hannah noticed a man watching them, a doctor she hadn't seen before. He looked directly at her, not at Victor. His eyes held concern, not calculation. When Victor stepped away to answer another call, the man leaned closer and spoke quietly. "You look scared," he said. "You should know you can say no." Before Hannah could respond, Victor returned, placing a firm hand on her back and guiding her forward. The moment passed, but something had shifted. For the first time since the plan began, Hannah understood she was not invisible. Someone had seen her fear, and Victor had not noticed. Victor's urgency increased after that day. He stopped pretending this was about Hannah's comfort and began speaking only in deadlines. Every conversation carried the same weight, the same invisible countdown ticking towards something Hannah could not yet see but could feel pressing against her chest. Lydia Cross moved into their lives quietly, like a shadow that didn't belong but refused to leave. She began appearing at the penthouse without warning, always fragile, always grateful, always watching Hannah a second longer than necessary. Lydia spoke softly, as if every word cost her strength. She talked about fear, about pain, about not wanting to die young, and every sentence was carefully shaped to make Hannah feel responsible. One afternoon, Hannah passed the guest bedroom and heard voices. Victor's was calm, efficient. Lydia's was not weak anymore. It was sharp, confident, impatient. "She's hesitating," Lydia said. "That's dangerous." "She'll do it," Victor replied. "She has no choice." Hannah froze, her hand pressed against the wall, her breath shallow. There was no sickness in Lydia's voice, no fear, only calculation. "She's pregnant," Lydia continued. "That actually helps. Faster healing, more leverage." Victor laughed quietly. "Exactly." Hannah stepped back before the floor could betray her. Her hands shook violently now. This wasn't desperation, this was strategy. That night, Lydia cornered Hannah in the kitchen while Victor took a call. She smiled kindly, touching Hannah's arm as if they were friends. "You're strong," Lydia said. "Stronger than you think. Some women are meant to give." Hannah pulled away. "I haven't agreed to anything." Lydia tilted her head. "You already have, you just don't know it yet." Fear crawled up Hannah's spine. She locked herself in the bathroom and threw up until her throat burned. Her baby kicked again, harder this time. She pressed both hands to her stomach and whispered apologies through tears. She felt trapped inside her own body, inside a marriage that no longer recognized her as human. The next morning, Victor handed her a schedule. Appointments, evaluations, signatures, all planned, all arranged. When Hannah asked what would happen if she refused, Victor looked at her calmly. "Then I'll prove you're unstable," he said. "I'll take the baby, and you'll be alone." Later that day, at the clinic, Hannah passed Lydia's room and saw her standing, healthy and dressed, laughing on the phone. The IV was gone, the weakness was gone, the lie was gone. A man stepped into the hallway ahead, the same doctor from before. He paused, looking at Hannah with quiet concern. "This isn't right," he said softly. "You're being rushed, you're being pressured." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "What can I do?" He glanced toward the corner camera, then back at her. "When they ask if you consent, you say you don't feel safe. Those words matter." Before Hannah could thank him, Victor's hand closed around her arm. His grip tightened as he smiled at the doctor. "Everything's under control," he said. As Victor pulled her away, Hannah looked back once more. The doctor nodded, almost imperceptibly. It was the smallest sign of resistance, but it was enough. For the first time, Hannah understood the truth clearly. Lydia was not dying. Victor was not saving anyone. They were sacrificing her. And time was running out. That evening, Victor scheduled the final consent signing for the next morning. Victor's urgency increased after that day. He stopped pretending this was about Hannah's comfort and began speaking only in deadlines. Every conversation carried the same weight, the same invisible countdown ticking towards something Hannah could not yet see but could feel pressing against her chest. Lydia Cross moved into their lives quietly, like a shadow that didn't belong but refused to leave. She began appearing at the penthouse without warning, always fragile, always grateful, always watching Hannah a second longer than necessary. Lydia spoke softly, as if every word cost her strength. She talked about fear, about pain, about not wanting to die young, and every sentence was carefully shaped to make Hannah feel responsible. One afternoon, Hannah passed the guest bedroom and heard voices. Victor's was calm, efficient. Lydia's was not weak anymore. It was sharp, confident, impatient. "She's hesitating," Lydia said. That's dangerous. She'll do it, Victor replied. She has no choice. Hannah froze, her hand pressed against the wall, her breath shallow. There was no sickness in Lydia's voice, no fear. Only calculation. She's pregnant, Lydia continued. That actually helps. Faster healing. More leverage. Victor laughed quietly. Exactly. Hannah stepped back before the floor could betray her. Her hands shook violently now. This wasn't desperation, this was strategy. That night, Lydia cornered Hannah in the kitchen while Victor took a call. She smiled kindly, touching Hannah's arm as if they were friends. You're strong, Lydia said. Stronger than you think. Some women are meant to give. Hannah pulled away. I haven't agreed to anything. Lydia tilted her head. You already have, you just don't know it yet. Fear crawled up Hannah's spine. She locked herself in the bathroom and threw up until her throat burned. Her baby kicked again, harder this time. She pressed both hands to her stomach and whispered apologies through tears. She felt trapped inside her own body, inside a marriage that no longer recognized her as human. The next morning, Victor handed her a schedule. Appointments, evaluations, signatures, all planned, all arranged. When Hannah asked what would happen if she refused, Victor looked at her calmly. Then I'll prove you're unstable, he said. I'll take the baby, and you'll be alone. Hannah felt sweat gather at her temples as the walls seemed to close in. She could hear her pulse louder than the voices, louder than Victor's threats. Every instinct told her to run, yet her legs refused to move. She thought of the nursery she never finished, the tiny clothes folded alone, the future she imagined. This room was stealing that future piece by piece. Fear begged her to surrender, but something deeper answered back. It was not courage, it was motherhood, raw and unyielding, demanding she protect what could not speak for itself. Right now, she understood, survival was no longer optional. As staff hesitated, unsure, Hannah felt another contraction tighten around her womb, stronger than before. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarm beeped once, sharp and urgent, and for the first time, Victor realized Hannah's body was about to force a decision he could no longer control. Pain rolled through Hannah's body in slow waves as the clinic staff guided her into a private waiting room. The contraction faded, leaving her breathless and cold, but its warning remained. Something was changing, and Victor could feel it too. His calm cracked into irritation, his voice sharper as he spoke to nurses, demanding speed, demanding answers. A fetal monitor was strapped around Hannah's stomach. The steady rhythm filled the room, the sound of her baby's heart fighting to stay steady inside chaos. A nurse glanced at the screen, then at Hannah's face, pale and damp with sweat. She needs rest, the nurse said carefully. Victor cut her off. She needs to sign. The door opened and the doctor Hannah had seen before stepped inside. Dr. Samuel Ortega. He did not rush. He washed his hands slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming time Victor wanted stolen. He reviewed the chart, his brow tightening. She's having contractions, he said, stress-induced. This pregnancy is high risk. Victor crossed his arms. We're not here for pregnancy. We're here for consent. Dr. Ortega finally looked directly at Hannah. Do you feel safe right now? The question landed like oxygen. Hannah swallowed, remembering his words from the hallway. Her voice trembled, but she spoke. No. Silence spread through the room. Victor laughed once, sharp and humorless. She's anxious. It's documented. Dr. Ortega raised a hand. Anxiety does not remove autonomy, and coercion voids consent. He turned to the nurse. Pause all paperwork. Victor stepped forward. You don't have authority. I do, Dr. Ortega replied calmly. And so does the law. The nurse hesitated, then nodded, setting the clipboard down. The smallest action, but it felt monumental to Hannah. Victor's face darkened. He leaned close to her ear. You're making this worse, he whispered. You're embarrassing yourself. Hannah closed her eyes. For the first time, she did not apologize. Minutes stretched. Outside, voices murmured. Phones rang. Victor paced like a trapped animal. Hannah focused on breathing, on the monitor's rhythm, on keeping her baby safe for one more minute. Then Victor's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, stiffening. We're running out of time, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Dr. Ortega noticed. Time for what? Victor didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Hannah, lowering his voice into something almost tender. "If you sign now, this all stops. No courts, no drama. I'll take care of you." Hannah opened her eyes and met his gaze. She saw the truth clearly now. This was not care, this was containment. "I won't," she said. Victor straightened, his mask slipping. "Then you leave here with nothing." Dr. Ortega stepped between them. "She leaves here protected." Security appeared at the doorway, summoned quietly by the nurse. Victor stared, realizing control was slipping. Thread by thread, Hannah's phone buzzed in her hand. One new message from an unknown number. "Do not sign anything. I'm on my way." Her heart skipped. She didn't know who was coming, only that Victor's certainty was cracking. And for the first time since this began, the power in the room was no longer his alone. Hannah rested her hand over her belly, feeling a calm she had not felt in weeks. Fear still existed, but it no longer ruled her decisions. Somewhere beyond the walls, help was moving closer. Victor sensed it, too, and for the first time, money could not buy silence, speed, or obedience from anyone in that building. That truth settled heavily, promising consequences for him and survival for her, beginning a reversal no one inside could stop from now on. Victor did not speak after the message arrived. His jaw tightened as he stared at Hannah's phone, then at Dr. Ortega, calculating angles the way he always did when a deal began to slip. Hannah felt the shift immediately. The pressure in the room changed, heavier but less certain, like a storm losing direction. Dr. Ortega stepped out briefly, returning with a woman in a dark blazer carrying a tablet and a badge clipped to her pocket. She introduced herself as the patient advocate. Her presence alone altered the balance. She spoke calmly, asking Hannah direct questions, ignoring Victor entirely. "Are you being pressured to consent?" she asked. "Yes," Hannah answered, louder than she expected. Victor scoffed. "She's emotional. She's confused." The advocate looked at him once. "Sir, you will not speak for her." Hannah's hands shook, but she continued. She described the threats, the financial control, the signatures she had not written. Each word felt like stepping onto thin ice, yet the ice held. The advocate typed steadily, documenting everything. Victor pulled out his phone and stepped aside, making calls, whispering urgently. Hannah caught fragments. Lawyers, boards, favors owed. His confidence began leaking through the cracks. Dr. Ortega returned with printed records. "These evaluations were ordered under false pretenses," he said. "And her pregnancy makes donation contraindicated." Victor snapped. "That's your opinion." "No," Ortega replied. "That's medical law." The advocate raised her head. "Mr. Langford, until further notice, all procedures are suspended. Any attempt to coerce this patient will be reported." Victor's face flushed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The advocate didn't blink. "I don't need to." Hannah felt a strange clarity settle over her. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer dictated her voice. She realized Victor's greatest weapon had never been money. It had been her silence. And silence was breaking. Another contraction rippled through her, weaker this time. The nurse adjusted the monitor, murmuring reassurance. The baby's heartbeat remained steady. Then the hallway grew quiet. Footsteps approached, measured and confident, not rushed, not nervous. The door opened. A man in a tailored coat entered, silver hair neatly combed, posture unmistakably disciplined. His eyes went straight to Hannah. They softened instantly. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I'm here." Victor turned slowly. Color drained from his face. "Who is this?" The man finally looked at him. "Thomas More," he replied. "Her father." The room froze. Hannah's breath caught as memories rushed back. Years of distance, silence chosen for protection, strength hidden for survival. Her father stepped closer, placing his hand gently over hers. "No one will touch my daughter," he said evenly, "and no one will threaten my grandchild." Victor tried to speak, but no sound came out. The advocate straightened. Dr. Ortega exhaled slowly. Hannah felt tears fall, not from fear, but relief. The kind that comes when truth finally arrives, undeniable and unstoppable. And Victor understood, too late, that the game had changed completely. He saw, in that instant, every leverage he relied on crumble. The contracts meant nothing, the threats evaporated. Power shifted to hands that did not shake. Hannah squeezed her father's fingers, grounding herself in the present, in safety. Outside, Manhattan moved on, unaware of the quiet collapse happening inside these walls. Victor backed away, trapped by witnesses and records, by truth finally spoken aloud. The advocate requested security. Dr. Ortega documented timestamps. Consequences lined up patiently. For Hannah, the future reopened, fragile but real, beginning with one breath, one heartbeat, one undeniable fact: she was no longer alone. Motherhood, justice, and love would now define the life ahead. Silence spread through the waiting room after Thomas More spoke. A silence so heavy it pressed against Victor's chest and stole his breath. Victor recovered quickly, forcing a smile that looked convincing only to people who had never seen him cornered. "This clinic is private property, General," he said, trying to sound calm while his fingers trembled. Thomas More did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply looked at Victor the way men in uniform look at problems that will be handled. "You have exactly zero authority over my daughter's body, and even less over federal medical law." The patient advocate cleared her throat. "Security has been notified," she said. "All documentation and recordings are now preserved." Victor's eyes darted toward the hallway, calculating exits, influence, leverage. None appeared. Dr. Ortega stepped beside Thomas, holding the chart. "This procedure is illegal, unethical, and dangerous," he said. "It ends now." Hannah sat quietly, absorbing the shift like a wave. Her hands rested over her stomach, feeling her baby move again. Strong, alive. Victor straightened his jacket, a familiar gesture when he was losing. "You think this makes you powerful?" he snapped. Thomas turned fully toward him. "No," he replied, "it makes you accountable." Security officers entered, calm but firm. Victor's protests echoed uselessly as they positioned themselves between him and Hannah. The patient advocate asked Hannah one final question. "Would you like to leave this facility immediately?" "Yes," Hannah said, her voice steady. As she stood, pain flared briefly, then faded. Her father moved instinctively, supporting her weight. Victor watched. Powerless, as controls slipped away in real time. He saw staff avoiding his eyes, phones raised, whispers spreading. Outside, an ambulance waited, not for Lydia, but for Hannah. "A precaution," Dr. Ortega explained. Lydia screamed from down the hall, her voice sharp, furious. "You promised." No one answered her. As Hannah was escorted out, she caught Victor's gaze. For the first time, fear lived there, not concern. Fear. The doors closed behind her, sealing the clinic, the lies, the plan that nearly destroyed her. In the ambulance, Hannah exhaled deeply, tears slipping free. Thomas squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry I waited," he said. Hannah shook her head. "You came," she replied. "That's what matters." Sirens faded into the city's noise. For the first time in months, Hannah felt safe. Behind them, Victor Langford's world began to collapse. Quietly, inevitably, under the weight of evidence and witnesses. He would fight, Hannah knew. Men like Victor always did. But the fear was gone. In its place stood truth, recorded and protected. The baby kicked, steady and sure, as if reminding her why she endured. Hannah closed her eyes, holding on to that rhythm, unaware that this escape was only the beginning. Victor would soon learn that power borrowed from fear never lasts. Investigations would follow, accounts frozen, names dragged into light. But tonight, none of that mattered to Hannah. She rested against the stretcher, listening to her father's calm breathing, memorizing the feeling of safety. For the first time, the future did not feel like a threat. It felt uncertain, yes, and fragile, but it belonged to her. Hannah did not know what justice would look like, only that it had started. Somewhere behind hospital walls, Victor was realizing something terrifying. Money could delay, threaten, and manipulate, but it could not erase what had been seen. Hannah opened her eyes and smiled faintly, one hand over her heart. The road ahead would be hard, but it would be hers. And Victor's grip was finally gone forever, now completely broken beyond repair. Night fell over Manhattan as Hannah lay in a private hospital room. Lights dimmed, machines humming softly around her. The adrenaline had faded, leaving exhaustion heavy in her limbs. Yet sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, Victor's voice returned, sharp and cold, reminding her how close she had come to losing everything. Thomas sat beside her bed, silent, watchful. He had not left since the ambulance arrived. His presence was steady, grounding, but it also opened old wounds. Years of absence pressed between them, unspoken and unresolved. "I should have told you sooner," Hannah said finally. Thomas nodded once. "I should have listened sooner." They shared a quiet understanding. Regret did not need details. A nurse entered to check Hannah's vitals. "Baby looks good," she said with a reassuring smile. "You did the right thing coming in." Hannah swallowed hard. Doing the right thing had nearly destroyed her. Across the city, Victor Langford was not sleeping either. He sat alone in his penthouse, jacket still on, staring at his phone as messages piled up unanswered. The clinic's board demanded explanations. Investors asked questions he could not dodge. For the first time in his life, silence from money terrified him. Lydia Cross paced his living room, no longer pretending weakness. "You let her walk out," she hissed. "You promised this would be done." Victor turned slowly. "You said she would sign. I said you would make her sign." Glass shattered as Victor slammed his fist into the table. Everything was controlled. "It still can be," Lydia said. "We discredit her. Mental instability, pregnancy hormones, we move fast." Victor hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. Back at the hospital, Hannah's phone buzzed with a message from Rachel Nguyen. "We're filing an emergency protective order tonight. He can't reach you." Relief washed over Hannah so suddenly she began to cry. Not quietly, not politely. She cried until her chest ached and her father held her hand tighter. Dr. Ortega stopped by briefly, explaining the next steps. Reports, statements, investigations. He spoke gently, but the weight of his words lingered. "This won't be quick," he warned, "but it will be thorough." Hannah nodded. She was no longer afraid of time. She was afraid of silence. Later, alone again, Hannah rested both hands on her stomach, feeling the slow, reassuring movement inside. She whispered promises she would keep: protection, truth, freedom. What she did not know was that Victor was already moving, calling favors, preparing his counterattack. He would not surrender quietly. He never had. And somewhere between fear and resolve, Hannah understood something new. Escaping the clinic had saved her body. The next battle would test her spirit. Outside the window, traffic flowed like a river of light, uncaring, endless, reminding Hannah that the world never stopped for private suffering. She watched it until her breathing slowed. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, statements, and public scrutiny. Lies would surface. Truth would be questioned. But tonight, she allowed herself one fragile certainty. She had chosen her child. She had chosen herself. And no amount of wealth, pressure, or fear would ever rewrite that decision again. This certainty did not erase pain, but it gave it meaning. Hannah closed her eyes, listening to her heartbeat align with her baby's. Whatever storms followed, she would face them standing, not trapped, not silent. Somewhere in the city, Victor planned his revenge. Here, in this room, Hannah planned a life. It would be built slowly, honestly, and without fear, beginning with survival, then justice, and finally peace for herself and her unborn child at last, now. Morning arrived without softness. Hannah woke to the sound of her phone vibrating non-stop on the bedside table. Missed calls, unknown numbers, news alerts. Her name was no longer private. The story had begun to leak, distorted and sharpened by people who did not know her but were eager to judge. Thomas was already on the phone, speaking in short, controlled sentences. "Yes, no comment. Refer all inquiries to counsel." He ended the call and looked at Hannah. "Victor is pushing a narrative." Hannah exhaled slowly. "Of course he is." Rachel Nguyen arrived before breakfast, laptop open, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. "He filed first," she said. "Emergency motion, claiming you're mentally unstable and being manipulated by your father." Hannah felt the old fear twitch inside her, but it did not take over. "And our response?" Rachel met her gaze. "We tell the truth, with evidence." By noon, Hannah gave her statement. Every detail, every threat, every signature she never signed. Dr. Ortega submitted his report. The patient advocate released timestamps. Security footage was preserved. the story Victor wanted collapsed under documentation. Across town, Victor sat in a glass conference room, surrounded by lawyers. His confidence had not returned. Every time his phone buzzed, his jaw tightened. The word investigation hovered in the air, unspoken but understood. Lydia watched him from the corner, eyes calculating. "You should have stopped her," she said quietly. Victor snapped. "You should have stayed in the hospital." Their alliance cracked, thin and brittle. By evening, the court granted Hannah a temporary restraining order. Victor could not contact her, could not approach her, could not control her. The decision arrived as a simple notification on her phone, but it felt like a door locking behind her forever. Hannah cried again, softer this time. Relief mixed with grief. She was losing a marriage she once believed in, but she was reclaiming herself. Later, Thomas walked her through the hospital garden. The air was cool, grounding. "I thought cutting contact would keep you safe," he said. "I know," Hannah replied, "but I needed you now." He nodded. "I'm here." As night fell, Hannah returned to her room, exhausted but clear. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not shaped by Victor's voice. It felt unfamiliar. It felt possible. On a screen somewhere, Victor watched coverage he could not stop. His name appeared beside words he despised: coercion, fraud, investigation. He realized too late that he had underestimated silence, turning into testimony. Hannah rested her hands over her stomach, feeling a steady kick. "We're okay," she whispered. Outside, the city moved forward, indifferent and vast. Inside, something irreversible had shifted. Victor's power was no longer invisible. Hannah's voice was no longer small. This was not the end. It was the dividing line. On one side stood a man losing control of a story he thought he owned. On the other stood a woman who had survived the worst moment of her life and refused to disappear. Tomorrow would bring depositions, courtrooms, and confrontation. Tonight, Hannah slept knowing she had crossed the point of no return. Whatever followed, she would face it awake, protected, and no longer alone, carrying not fear but purpose, steady and unbroken, into a future Victor could never touch again. Rachel Wynne arrived early the next morning with a different expression on her face, one Hannah had not seen before. It was not urgency, it was certainty. She placed her laptop on the table and turned the screen toward Hannah and Thomas without speaking at first. "We dug deeper into Lydia Cross," Rachel said finally. "Not just medical records. Financials, travel, name changes." Hannah leaned forward, heart tightening. "And?" Rachel clicked once. A timeline appeared. Different states, different clinics, different names, the same pattern repeating over 10 years. "Lydia Cross is not her legal name," Rachel continued. "It's her third." Hannah felt a chill. "Third?" Rachel nodded. "She's been investigated twice before. Both cases settled quietly. One donor backed out. One surgery stopped mid-process. No charges. Money erased everything." Thomas's jaw hardened. "Until now." Rachel scrolled again. "Her kidney failure is real," she said, "but not terminal. She refused dialysis repeatedly. She delayed treatment to force urgency. That pressure was intentional." Hannah closed her eyes. The sickness she felt had nothing to do with pregnancy. "At least 3 women were targeted before," Rachel added. "None pregnant. You were different." "Because of Victor," Hannah said softly. "Yes," Rachel replied, "because of access." Across the city, Lydia sat alone in a hotel room, staring at her phone as messages went unanswered. Victor had stopped replying hours ago. She refreshed her banking app again and again, watching balances freeze one by one. Panic crept in where confidence once lived. Victor, meanwhile, sat in another legal meeting, face pale, listening as his attorney spoke carefully. "If Lydia cooperates, she reduces her exposure. If she doesn't, federal charges are likely." Victor stared at the table. "She won't talk." The attorney hesitated. "She already has." Back at the hospital, Dr. Ortega entered Hannah's room with a quiet knock. "Investigators will want your testimony again," he said. "They're connecting cases." Hannah nodded. "I'll do it." Rachel met her eyes. "This is where it shifts," she said. "From defense to accountability." By afternoon, news outlets began correcting their narratives. Headlines changed tone. Sources cited court filings. Victor's influence weakened with every update. Thomas stood by the window, watching reporters gather outside. "They won't stop now," he said. Hannah rested a hand on her belly. "Neither will I." That evening, Lydia was detained for questioning. Cameras caught her being escorted through a lobby, no makeup, no strength, no mask. Her eyes searched for someone who would save her. No one came. Hannah watched the footage silently. She felt no triumph, only clarity. "This ends the lies," Rachel said. Hannah shook her head slowly. "It begins the truth." For the first time, the fear loosened its grip completely. The trap was visible now, the pattern exposed. Victor's silence confirmed everything. And somewhere deep inside, Hannah understood something else. Survival had turned into purpose. What happened to her would not disappear quietly. It would matter. Victor Langford decided to strike back the moment Lydia was detained. He no longer believed silence would protect him. Silence had turned into evidence, and evidence was spreading faster than money could contain. By nightfall, his attorneys filed an emergency motion demanding Hannah undergo a psychological evaluation, citing pregnancy stress, past anxiety notes, and alleged manipulation by her father. The document arrived on Rachel Nguyen's screen just after midnight. "They're going after your credibility," Rachel said the next morning, her tone sharp but controlled. "Classic move. If they can label you unstable, they poison everything you say." Hannah read the filing slowly. Each sentence felt like an accusation carved from her worst fears. Unfit. Emotionally compromised. Influenced. She placed the tablet down carefully, breathing through the familiar pressure in her chest. "They're trying to take my baby," she said. "Yes," Rachel answered honestly, "but they're overreaching." Thomas leaned forward. "What's our counter?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "We forced disclosure, full records, his communications, his clinic investments, everything." That afternoon, Victor sat across from his legal team as they warned him the risk was escalating. "If the judge grants discovery," one lawyer said, "they'll see patterns you don't want seen." Victor's eyes hardened. "Then we delay." But delay failed him. By evening, the judge denied his motion and granted Hannah protection from any compelled evaluation, citing coercion evidence and pregnancy risk. The ruling landed like a crack through Victor's remaining control. At the hospital, Hannah felt the weight lift only slightly. Relief did not erase fear, it sharpened it. Dr. Ortega stopped by again, this time with a quiet seriousness. "You should prepare," he said. "Victor will push harder. This is where men like him become dangerous." Hannah nodded. "I know." Later, alone, she recorded a statement. Not for court, for herself. She spoke plainly, naming what had happened, naming the fear, naming the truth. When she finished, her hands were steady. Across the city, Victor met with a private consultant, someone who specialized in reputation management. "We control the narrative," the man said. "Paint her as tragic, confused, not malicious, just unwell." Victor agreed. He always did. The next morning, an article appeared suggesting Hannah's claims were exaggerated. It quoted unnamed sources. It questioned motives. It implied manipulation. Hannah saw it and felt the sting, but it did not break her. Instead, something unexpected happened. Messages arrived. Women she did not know, nurses, former patients. Quiet voices saying the same thing. "I believe you. This happened to me too. Thank you for speaking." Rachel read them silently, then looked up. "This is bigger now," she said. "And Victor knows it." That evening, Hannah stood by the window, city lights reflecting in glass. Her baby moved gently inside her, grounding her in the present. She understood the truth clearly now. Victor was no longer fighting to win. He was fighting to survive. And she was done surviving. Victor Langford arrived at the courthouse believing intimidation still worked. He wore a tailored suit, expression calm, surrounded by attorneys who spoke in rehearsed confidence. Cameras flashed as he entered, and for a moment, he felt familiar power return. Appear strong, appear certain, and doubt would follow. Inside a quiet conference room, Hannah waited with Rachel and Thomas. Her hands rested over her stomach, posture steady. She no longer looked like someone being dragged into court, she looked prepared. When Victor entered, their eyes met briefly. He looked away first. The hearing began without drama. The judge reviewed filings, evidence, timestamps, and sworn statements. Victor's team argued instability, emotional influence, and exaggeration. Rachel responded methodically, presenting recordings, consent laws, and medical standards. Dr. Ortega's testimony followed, precise and unshakable. Then the judge asked one question. Mr. Langford, why was a pregnant woman scheduled for kidney donation without independent evaluation? Victor stood. He opened his mouth, then paused. Silence stretched. His attorney whispered urgently, but the hesitation had already spoken. I was trying to save a life, Victor said finally. The judge nodded slowly. At any cost? Rachel stood. Your Honor, we request admission of newly discovered evidence. She pressed play. The room filled with audio, Victor's voice cold and unmistakable. If you refuse, you leave here alone. Without money, without a child. Victor's face drained of color. Murmurs rippled through the room. The judge's expression hardened. Who recorded this? The judge asked. Rachel answered. Clinic security, preserved by court order. The judge turned back to Victor. You threatened custody to force bodily harm. Victor shook his head. That's not enough, the judge said sharply. In that moment, the balance shifted completely. The hearing ended with rulings Victor never expected, extended protective orders, immediate financial disclosures, referral to federal investigators for medical coercion. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Victor ignored them, walking stiffly to his car. His phone buzzed nonstop, partners distancing themselves. Accounts flagged, silence replaced loyalty. Hannah stepped into the sunlight slowly, surrounded by support. The noise washed over her, but it no longer frightened her. She felt something steadier than courage. Vindication. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. You did well. Hannah exhaled. It's not over. No, Rachel said, but it's irreversible. Across the street, Victor watched from behind tinted glass as Hannah walked away free. For the first time, he understood the truth. Power taken through fear always demands payment, and his bill had come due, with interest, witnesses, and a future he could no longer control. That realization haunted him as doors closed and engines started. For Hannah, the same moment felt different. She felt the weight of weeks lift from her chest, replaced by resolve. The courthouse steps became a threshold, dividing who she had been from who she would become. She did not smile for cameras, did not wave, did not speak. She simply walked, one careful step at a time, protecting the life inside her. Rachel spoke to reporters, firm and factual. Thomas shielded Hannah from noise. Somewhere behind them, Victor sat frozen, replaying the audio in his mind, hearing his own words strip him bare. He had believed power was permanent. He had believed fear was loyalty. Both illusions shattered. Investigations would expand. Testimonies would follow. Consequences would arrive slowly, then all at once. Hannah felt none of that yet. She felt only movement within her, steady and reassuring. That rhythm reminded her why she endured humiliation, threats, and doubt. Whatever storms remained, she had crossed the point of return. The truth had spoken, and it would keep speaking after Victor fell. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within days of the courthouse hearing, federal agents arrived at Victor Langford's medical investment offices with warrants in hand. Files were seized, servers were copied. Phones were collected from executives who had once believed themselves untouchable. The empire Victor built on silence and pressure began to fracture under fluorescent lights and official seals. Hannah followed the developments from a quiet apartment arranged by Rachel. It was temporary, secure, and intentionally ordinary. No marble floors, no doormen who reported her movements. Just space to breathe. Each morning she woke to sunlight and the steady reminder of life moving inside her. Rachel visited with updates, her tone precise. They confirmed altered consent documents, she said. Digital edits, pre-signed templates. It's worse than we thought. Hannah closed her eyes. The sickness returned briefly, then passed. What about the clinic staff? Several flipped, Rachel answered, including a coordinator who admits she was paid to ignore red flags. Across the city, Victor sat in a conference room with investigators, his confidence gone. He answered questions carefully, too carefully, choosing words like shields. But shields cracked when Lydia Cross's full history was introduced. She used 4 aliases, an agent said flatly. And you funded her travel. Victor said nothing. The agent leaned forward. You knew exactly what you were doing. Victor's silence was noted. That afternoon, Lydia was formally charged. The footage of her arrest spread quickly. Gone was the fragile woman from hospital beds. In her place stood someone smaller, exposed, eyes darting toward exits that did not exist. Hannah watched one clip and turned it off. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet finality. Dr. Ortega visited later that day. "Your stress levels are stabilizing," he said with a small smile. "That matters." "It's because I'm not being hunted anymore," Hannah replied. He nodded. "That helps." Outside, public opinion shifted sharply. New reports connected dots. Experts spoke. Patterns emerged. Victor's name became shorthand for abuse of power. Sponsors withdrew. Boards suspended him. The man who once controlled rooms now avoided windows. Victor tried to call Hannah once. The call never reached her. The restraining order blocked it automatically. That silence broke something inside him. For the first time, his voice meant nothing. That night, Hannah sat alone, writing in a notebook. Not evidence. Not testimony. Truth. In her own words. She wrote about fear, about being reduced to usefulness, about the moment she chose to speak. The baby kicked as if approving. She paused, hand resting on the page. She understood something clearly now. Justice was not loud, it was relentless. Elsewhere, Victor's lawyers warned him quietly, "If this goes to trial, prison is possible." Victor stared at the wall. He had no response. Hannah learned of this the next morning. Rachel delivered the news gently. "He's facing federal charges." Hannah nodded. "I just want it to end." "It will," Rachel said, on the record. As the day faded, Hannah stood by the window, watching the city glow. She was tired, deeply, but it was a clean exhaustion, no fear attached. Just the weight of survival giving way to something steadier. Behind bars or in boardrooms, consequences were aligning. For Victor, the future narrowed. For Hannah, it opened. He placed both hands over her stomach and whispered, "We're almost free." Outside, sirens passed without meaning. Inside, peace began to settle. Not sudden, not dramatic, but earned. The truth had done its work, and it would not stop now. 3 weeks later, Hannah returned to the clinic building for the first time, not as a patient, but as a witness. The marble lobby looked smaller now, stripped of power and illusion. Federal notices were taped beside the elevator, and staff avoided eye contact, moving like people who knew the ground beneath them had shifted permanently. Hannah walked slowly, one hand on her belly, Rachel at her side. Dr. Ortega waited near the conference room, his posture tense. Inside, several clinic executives sat with attorneys, faces pale. The atmosphere was heavy. No cameras, no Victor, only consequences. When Hannah entered, something unexpected happened. One by one, members of the surgical team stood. A nurse began to cry. A junior doctor lowered his head. The chief surgeon stepped forward, voice shaking. "We failed you," he said. "We chose speed and silence over ethics. We are sorry." The words landed harder than any threat ever had. Hannah felt tears rise, but she did not look away. This apology was not mercy. It was acknowledgement. The surgeon continued, "We cooperated because we were afraid. Afraid of Victor, afraid of losing our careers. That does not excuse what we did." Several staff members followed, admitting they had ignored signs of coercion. One nurse knelt, hands trembling, whispering apologies she could barely finish. It was not dramatic. It was raw and deeply human. Hannah listened without interrupting. When they finished, the room waited for her response. "I don't forgive you today," she said quietly, "but I accept the truth. And I hope you never forget what silence costs." No one argued. Outside, news broke minutes later. The clinic's license was suspended, the board dissolved. Investigators confirmed systemic violations. The building that once symbolized control became evidence. That evening, Hannah sat alone again, exhaustion settling into her bones. Rachel called with updates. Victor's assets were frozen, several properties seized. His influence was gone. "You did this," Rachel said. Hannah shook her head. "He did." Later, Thomas joined her, placing a blanket over her shoulders. "You stood your ground," he said. "So did others," Hannah replied. That night, for the first time in months, Hannah slept without fear. No dreams of hallways or signatures, only quiet. Somewhere across the city, Victor sat in an empty apartment, lights off, phone silent. He replayed the apologies in his mind, understanding too late that power collapses when witnesses speak. For Hannah, that realization felt different. It felt like release. Her child moved gently, steady, and strong. She smiled, knowing this chapter was closing, not with revenge, but with accountability, and that was enough. The following morning brought sunlight and paperwork, prenatal checks and legal calls, but Hannah felt anchored. She attended one more meeting, where regulators explained next steps and protections. She asked careful questions, not for herself alone, but for others who might be trapped in similar silence someday. Rachel outlined timelines, trials, and possible sentences. Thomas listened, silent. Hannah listened, calm. She had learned patience from fear and strength from survival. As dusk returned, Hannah stood by the window again, breathing steadily, preparing for what remained. Justice was no longer an abstract word. It was happening, slowly, correctly, and with witnesses. It would take time, hearings, and endurance, but Hannah felt ready. She placed both hands over her stomach and whispered a promise of safety. Outside, the city continued. Inside, a life and a future aligned. Victor's fall was no longer her burden. Her only task now was to move forward, protected, honest, and free. Tomorrow would come, but tonight, peace held, quietly, finally, without fear, for her. Victor Langford did not disappear quietly. When his assets were frozen and his name turned toxic, he did what men like him always did. He blamed everyone else. From a rented apartment far from his former penthouse, he authorized one final strategy. If he could not win legally, he would wound reputations and drag Hannah down with him. The first strike came as a lawsuit. Victor accused Hannah of defamation, claiming her testimony destroyed his career and endangered his mental health. The filing was aggressive, filled with dramatic language and selective facts. It was designed to exhaust her, to force her back into fear. Rachel Nguyen read it carefully, then closed the file. "This is retaliation," she said, "and it will fail." Hannah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but it did not spiral. She placed a hand on her belly and breathed. "Then we answer it." At the same time, Victor leaked private messages to a tabloid outlet, hoping to suggest reconciliation attempts, twisted into narratives of betrayal. The article ran briefly before being challenged. Screenshots did not match metadata. Dates conflicted. Lies collapsed under scrutiny. Public response shifted again, this time decisively. Commentators called Victor's actions desperate. Legal experts labeled the suit frivolous. For the first time, Hannah felt something close to vindication without effort. Across the city, Victor watched coverage he could not influence. He threw his phone across the room, the sound sharp and hollow. Every door he once opened easily now remained closed. Federal prosecutors escalated their case. New charges were added: conspiracy, wire fraud, medical coercion. His legal team advised a plea. Victor refused. "I won't kneel," he said. But the world no longer waited for his permission. Hannah attended another prenatal appointment, this time alone, calm. The doctor smiled. "Your blood pressure is normal," she said. "You look lighter." "I am," Hannah replied. Outside the clinic, she received a message from Rachel. Victor's countersuit dismissed. Judge's language was strong. Hannah closed her eyes, relief washing through her completely. The last rope Victor held had snapped. That evening, Thomas cooked dinner in the small apartment, something simple. They ate quietly, comfortable in silence. "He's running out of moves," Thomas said. Hannah nodded. "So am I. And that's okay." Later, she stood by the window, watching lights flicker on across the city. She felt tired, but not drained. The exhaustion came from closing doors, not holding them shut. Somewhere else, Victor sat alone, staring at documents that spelled the end. His name appeared beside words he once believed only applied to others: defendant, indicted, restricted. He finally understood what he had lost. Not money, not status. Control. For Hannah, that control had never been the goal. Safety had. Truth had. Life had. She rested her hands over her stomach as her baby moved gently, reminding her of what endured. Victor's fall was accelerating, but it no longer consumed her thoughts. Justice was now a process, not a battle she had to fight alone. Tomorrow would bring new headlines, hearings, and dates. Tonight brought something else, closure, not complete, but real. Hannah turned away from the window, turned off the light, and lay down peacefully. The past no longer chased her, the future waited patiently. And for the first time since this began, she slept without fear, knowing the worst was behind her, and nothing Victor tried could ever reach her again. Hannah entered her third trimester as autumn settled over the city, the air cooler, the light softer, and her body heavier with life and memory. Each step now required intention, but her mind felt clearer than it had in years. Fear no longer dictated her mornings. Purpose did. The legal storm continued around her, but it no longer defined her days. Court dates were scheduled, depositions prepared. Victor's name appeared regularly in filings she no longer read line by line. Rachel handled that. Hannah focused on breathing, on walking, on listening to the steady rhythm inside her. One afternoon, she attended a prenatal support session recommended by her doctor. She almost canceled, worried about being recognized, but went anyway. The room was simple, filled with women at different stages, each carrying her own story. No one asked who Hannah was. After the session, a man approached her near the hallway. He wore scrubs, not a doctor's coat, his manner calm and respectful. "I'm Ethan Brooks," he said. "I coordinate patient advocacy here. Dr. Ortega mentioned you." Hannah tensed slightly. Ethan noticed and stepped back. "Only if you're comfortable," he added. "I just wanted to say I'm glad you're safe." There was no curiosity in his voice. No agenda, just acknowledgement. "Thank you," Hannah replied. Over the following weeks, they crossed paths occasionally. Short conversations, shared elevator rides. Ethan never asked questions she didn't offer. He spoke about his work with families navigating trauma, about listening more than fixing. Hannah found herself relaxing around him, surprised by the absence of pressure. One evening, after a long appointment, Ethan offered to walk her to the exit. The city lights reflected in the glass doors. "You don't owe anyone strength," he said quietly. "Rest counts too." The words stayed with her. Meanwhile, Victor's case escalated. Lydia accepted a plea deal. Testimony expanded. The prosecution's timeline tightened. Headlines grew sharper. Hannah learned of developments through Rachel. Filtered, factual. "He's likely facing prison time," Rachel said one morning. Hannah nodded, absorbing it without triumph. "I hope he stops hurting people." That was all. As winter approached, Hannah prepared her home for the baby. Simple furniture, soft colors, no excess. Thomas helped assemble a crib, his hands careful. Their conversations were easier now. The past no longer a barrier, but a lesson. On a quiet evening, Hannah felt the baby settle, heavier, ready. She stood by the window, one hand on her stomach, one on the glass. Her life felt unfamiliar, but honest. A message arrived from Ethan, brief and considerate. Checking in, no expectation. Hannah smiled. For the first time since the clinic hallway, she allowed herself to imagine something beyond survival. Not revenge, not justice, connection. Outside, the city moved steadily forward. Inside, Hannah felt something align. The future would arrive whether she feared it or not. This time, she was ready to meet it standing, supported, and no longer alone, carrying hope instead of dread into the life waiting ahead. The trial date arrived quietly, without ceremony, but its weight settled over Hannah like gravity. She sat in the courtroom with Rachel beside her, hands folded over her stomach, listening as Victor Langford was escorted in wearing a suit that no longer protected him. He looked smaller. Not weaker, but diminished, like a man stripped of context. The prosecution spoke first, laying out timelines, documents, audio, and testimony. They did not raise their voices. They did not need drama. Facts stacked neatly, one after another, until the story could no longer bend. Victor's attorney argued coercion did not exist, that consent was implied, that fear was misunderstood emotion. The judge listened patiently, then allowed the first witness. Dr. Ortega took the stand and explained, in precise language, why the procedure should never have been scheduled. Pregnancy risks, ethical violations, manipulation. He spoke without anger. His calm carried weight. Next came the clinic coordinator, voice shaking, admitting payments and pressure. Screens lit up with messages, instructions, timelines. The courtroom grew silent. When Lydia appeared on video testimony, her plea agreement already signed, she avoided the camera. She admitted delaying treatment, admitted urgency was manufactured, admitted Victor promised protection. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, breathing through the moment. This was the last knot loosening. Victor finally spoke when allowed. His words were defensive, careful, hollow. He blamed stress, love, desperation. He never said Hannah's name. The judge asked one question. Would you do it again? Victor hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. By late afternoon, the ruling came. Charges would proceed. Assets remained frozen. Additional counts added. Bail conditions tightened. Outside, reporters surged, but Hannah walked past them without stopping. Rachel handled statements. Thomas shielded her path. That evening, Hannah sat alone, absorbing the truth. Justice did not feel explosive. It felt quiet, heavy, and final. A message arrived from Ethan, simple and steady. I'm here if you need anything. Hannah placed her phone down and rested her hands on her belly. The baby kicked, strong and sure. Victor was led back through a side door, his future narrowed to court dates and consequences. The world he controlled was gone. For Hannah, the opposite happened. The future widened. It held uncertainty, but also safety, honesty, and choice. She stood by the window, watching the city glow, and understood something deeply. This was not revenge. This was release. Hannah remained there for a long time, breathing slowly, letting the silence settle into her bones. She thought about the woman she had been months earlier, shrinking herself to survive, mistaking endurance for love. That woman felt distant now, like a version left behind deliberately. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a calendar alert for a prenatal appointment, ordinary and grounding. Life continued, not because justice demanded it, but because living was her right. Outside the courthouse, Victor's name echoed briefly in headlines, then began to fade, replaced by new stories, new scandals, new distractions. Power, she realized, was loud only until truth arrived. Hannah turned away from the window and sat, careful, present. The future would not be perfect. It would be real. And that was enough. She smiled faintly, imagining a small hand wrapping around her finger, a life untouched by coercion. In that image, she found quiet strength. Whatever followed, trials or healing, she would meet it honestly, supported, and awake. The past no longer defined her steps. Each breath carried her forward, free. It felt like sunrise after a long storm, gentle, irreversible, and earned through endurance rather than force or fear at last for her and the child she carried. Hannah gave birth on a quiet winter morning, snow falling softly outside the hospital windows. The labor was long, exhausting, and honest, but it was hers. No signatures, no threats, no one speaking over her. When the baby cried, strong and clear, Hannah cried too, releasing months of fear in one breath. Thomas stood nearby, eyes wet, hands steady. Ethan waited in the hallway, respecting distance, offering presence without demand. Nurses moved gently, calling Hannah by her name, not as someone's wife, not as a problem to solve, but as a mother. News arrived later that day. Victor Langford had accepted a plea agreement. Federal prison. Permanent loss of medical investments. Financial restitution ordered. His name would follow him into every background check for the rest of his life. The sentence was firm, public, and final. Hannah listened quietly as Rachel explained. There was no thrill, no victory rush. Only a sense of balance restored. The harm had been named, weighed, and answered. Weeks passed. Hannah recovered slowly, learning her body again, learning her child's rhythms. The apartment filled with ordinary sounds, bottles warming, soft footsteps, laughter surprising her in quiet moments. Peace did not arrive loudly. It settled in layers. Support checks arrived, settlements finalized, funds placed into a trust for her child. Hannah chose carefully, guided by advisors, refusing excess, choosing stability. The compensation felt less like reward and more like repair. One afternoon, Hannah walked through a small park, baby bundled against her chest. Ethan joined her, hands in his pockets, matching her pace. No expectations, he said gently, just walking. She smiled. That's enough. They spoke about small things. Sleep, weather, books, Silence filled the spaces comfortably. There was no rush to define anything. Trust grew because it was never demanded. At home, Hannah framed a simple photo. Her child's first day. No luxury backdrop, just light and safety. She placed it near the window. A letter arrived weeks later. Victor wrote from prison. Apologies wrapped in regret. Hannah read it once, then placed it away. Closure did not require response. She focused forward, therapy sessions, advocacy meetings, quiet plans. She agreed to help develop new safeguards for vulnerable patients, using her experience to protect others. One evening, as spring approached, Ethan stood beside her in the kitchen, holding the baby carefully. "You built something real," he said. Hannah looked at her child, then at him. "We did." It was not a proposal, it was a promise shaped by respect. Later, as the city glowed beyond the glass, Hannah reflected on everything she had lost and gained. Marriage ended, fear ended, a child born, a life reclaimed. Justice had come, not as cruelty, but as consequence. Victor paid with freedom. Lydia paid with truth. The clinic paid with accountability. Hannah was paid differently. She was paid with safety, with love that waited, with a future she chose. And for the first time, she felt truly wealthy. It was not money that defined that wealth, but freedom of choice and dignity restored through pain. Hannah understood now that survival was only the beginning, not the destination. She would raise her child without fear, without silence, without bargaining her body or voice. Each ordinary day would be proof. Each quiet morning would be victory. She accepted that healing was ongoing, uneven, and real. Yet she welcomed it. The past no longer owned her name. The future waited patiently. Hannah stepped forward, carrying love, responsibility, and courage, certain that nothing taken from her could ever be used against her again. This marked a true ending and an earned beginning. Hannah's life no longer felt like a recovery. It felt like construction. Each morning began with ordinary rituals: warming milk, opening curtains, watching her child stretch and yawn. These small moments became proof that the worst chapter was finished. Spring arrived gently. Trees bloomed along the sidewalks, and Hannah pushed the stroller through quiet streets, breathing without checking over her shoulder. Fear no longer followed her. Ethan remained present in a way that never demanded anything. He learned the baby's rhythms, showed up when asked, and stepped back when she needed space. Trust grew slowly, then naturally. One evening, after a long walk, they sat together in the small living room. The baby slept between them, breathing evenly. Hannah spoke first. "I don't want a rescue," she said. "I want a partnership." Ethan nodded. "So do I." They married quietly the following autumn. No press, no spectacle, just family, close friends, and promises spoken clearly. Hannah wore a simple dress, her child in her arms. Thomas stood beside her, pride soft in his eyes. Life after that was not perfect. There were sleepless nights, court paperwork that lingered, and memories that surfaced unexpectedly. But Hannah faced them steady and unafraid. She returned to healthcare, not as a victim, but as an advocate. Policies changed, training improved. Other women spoke up, safer because she had gone first. Victor remained where he belonged. His name faded from conversation, remembered only in files and warnings. Lydia disappeared from Hannah's thoughts entirely. What endured was love. Not dramatic or loud, but constant. Hannah built a home where voices mattered, where consent was never questioned, and where her child would grow knowing safety as normal. On a warm afternoon, Hannah watched her child take unsteady steps across the living room. Ethan waited nearby, smiling, ready but not pushing. Hannah laughed, tears in her eyes. This was the reward. Not wealth, not revenge, but a life reclaimed. She understood now that strength was not surviving cruelty. It was choosing kindness after. It was refusing silence, then refusing to let bitterness replace it. As evening settled, Hannah held her family close. Outside, the city glowed, indifferent yet beautiful. She felt no need to prove anything. Justice had been served. Love had arrived. Hannah closed the door on the past, not with anger, but with gratitude for having survived. The future opened, wide and honest. She stepped into it, certain of who she was and what she would never surrender again. This ending was not loud. It was earned. And it was hers. Years later, Hannah would tell her child the story gently. Not the violence, but the choice to speak. She taught them that bodies are not currency, that love never asks for sacrifice without care. These lessons shaped a child who grew brave, curious, and kind. Hannah and Ethan built traditions slowly, holidays filled with warmth, ordinary meals that tasted like safety. Their home welcomed laughter, disagreement, and repair. Nothing was hidden, everything was named. When challenges came, they faced them together. Hannah no longer feared loss. She trusted her voice, her judgment, and the people she chose. On one quiet night, after the child slept, Hannah stepped onto the balcony. She breathed deeply, remembering the woman she once was. She whispered, thanks to her past self for surviving. Peace answered her. This was the ending the story deserved, and the beginning that followed. Hannah turned back inside, closed the door, and chose joy. Again and again, every ordinary day. For the rest of her life, without fear, without silence, and without compromise, ever again fully. So the story comes to an end here. And if you're still with us right now, truly still here until this moment, then something in this journey has touched your heart in a quiet but meaningful way. Stories like Hannah's remind us of a simple truth many of us forget while trying to survive difficult relationships or painful seasons. Your body, your voice, and your life are never bargaining chips. Stoic thinkers like Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Healing begins the moment we stop believing we must endure harm to be worthy of love. What this story teaches us is not about revenge or winning, it's about choosing dignity. Hannah didn't become strong by fighting harder, she became strong by refusing to stay silent. That choice changed everything. In real life, courage often looks quiet. It looks like asking for help, setting a boundary, or walking away, even when fear whispers that you can't. If you're listening right now and something feels personal, take it as a sign. You deserve safety, you deserve respect, and you are allowed to choose yourself without guilt. As the Stoics believed, peace comes not from controlling others, but from standing firmly in your own values. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that heal, awaken, and remind us we're never alone on this path.